How about a warm round of applause for Dr. Julie Payne-Kirchmeier?
Thank you so much. I was told these were made of glass and not to touch them or break them, right? So thank you all so much. This is a topic that I am endlessly curious about and have been for years. You heard in the introduction that I've been honored to hold several leadership roles throughout my career. And I've always been fascinated by the idea of how deeply personal leadership is and how individual leaders will embrace, evolve, either succeed or sometimes in spectacular fashion fail. And so I deeply believe, as a leader in higher education for 20 years, that people do not come into positions of leadership for the most part with ill intentions. I firmly believe that people show up in these spaces truly wanting to help. Maybe they feel a calling, maybe they have an idea, they've got an innovation that they want to bring forward, but the intention is mostly pure, that they feel something that they can contribute and help lead a group through. Now, I believe that when you see these subtle losses in ethics, that those start with tiny little decisions, compromises, rationalizations that all lead up to something that's negative and in times harmful. Many of us in here may have been part of leadership experiences. We're on a team and we've been impacted by some of those negative leadership traits. I myself had a moment early in my career where I had one of those "how did I get here" conversations with myself. It was earlier in a senior leadership role several years ago when I started when I was 10. Thank you very much. And I was hired into a larger organization to really be the number 2 of the senior leader. And we were hired and brought in because we needed to turn something around. And so we locked arms and we dove in and we really did some exemplary work. And in that first year, I felt valued and seen. We were setting goals, we were achieving them, we were moving things forward, and I was honored to be part of that partnership, that team, work with the team members that I had brought together, and to serve the students we were called to serve. And then, as often happens, the team evolves. We have rightly hired in another person in a designed, more front-facing role, at the same level that I was. And this was, like I said, all by design, all in support of the direction we wanted to go. But then what I saw happening was this, and it's important to note that I said what I saw happening. This person was out in front more. This person was now presenting in spaces that I used to present in. This person was included in meetings that I used to be included in. And I found myself feeling very unseen, very frustrated, very bitter, and very, very isolated. And it was in that moment where I did something that I was not proud of at all. I started venting all of my frustrations to the people that reported to me. I started talking about things, about how I think this division wasn't run well, how the program was off course, and started to hint at, and then later on, really just flat out say that it was the fault of other people, and you can imagine who I was pointing to, that we weren't getting what we needed. And at some point, I remember sitting there in that space of bitterness, and it took control, saying, how on earth did I get here? I have become a leader that I wouldn't even recognize, and I certainly wouldn't recommend that somebody come and work for. It did cause me to really go in a very deep and introspective space. Looking back on it now, and as I will share with you today, we'll start talking about some of these characteristics, but I do think it's important that we have often seen bad leaders, but most of the time we find out about them because some announcement comes out, right? There's an alert on social media, or for those of us born in the 1900s, we watch it in the news. Things like that bring these folks to our attention. Now, for the people here and online who are not born in the 1900s, let me walk you through who some of these people are. The first person up on the left you may recognize, that's Ellen DeGeneres. And the reason she's up here is not because of who she is. Remember, bad leadership doesn't necessarily mean bad person. And that's an important distinction, all right? But she's up here because in 2020, there was an investigation into her team, and there were reports of toxic work environments that were coming up, people feeling like if they reported certain things, there would be retribution for them. And she indicated that she didn't know about it. And it resulted in the firing of 3 of her producers and ultimately the eventual cancellation of the show. The person in the middle is Bernie Madoff. This is the architect of one of the largest Ponzi schemes of investments in our nation's history. And his actions and his justifications in his own mind resulted in millions of dollars lost for people in their investments and or their pensions at all income levels. So it wasn't just rich people that suffered from this. There were multitudes of folks who were harmed. Ken Lay is in the upper right. He is the former CEO of Enron, and Enron had one of the biggest collapses and bankruptcies in the commodities industry. One day people went to work and everything was fine. The next day the whole place was shut down. People lost their jobs and their pensions because of intentional financial misleadings that he did as CEO of that company. On the lower left is Mark Sanders, who as of, I think 6 days ago, maybe 7, so y'all born in not the 1900s might know this name. He was the CEO of Superior Health Plans, and he was found responsible for hiring private investigators to investigate patients and their claims to see if they could dig up dirt on the patients so that the health plan didn't have to pay out, which is a problem, as you can imagine. Person in the middle there is Elizabeth Holmes. She's the CEO of Theranos and claimed that she had this revolutionary blood testing method that with 1 drop of your blood, she could tell you everything you needed to know about your health conditions, and it would have revolutionized the healthcare industry, except that it was a lie. And then finally, we have Adam Neumann, who is the former CEO of WeWork, who was accused of and found responsible really for creating a toxic work environment using the organization's finances as his personal piggy bank and really creating a toxic environment for employees in that space. So as I look at these folks here, I keep thinking, all right, we've got to be able to learn some things here, and maybe that can help inform me in my how did I get here moment. And so there are some things that these folks had in common. The first thing is they all existed in a power bubble. This is a space where they had insulated themselves from facts, from truth, from the harsh realities potentially that go along with leadership and leadership decisions. The second thing is they all made small compromises. So whether it was Elizabeth Holmes saying, you know what, I know it doesn't work now, but we're gonna fake it till we make it, right? Or whether it was Bernie Madoff saying, you know what, this is the last time I'm gonna take this money and not give people a return because it's gonna pay off and I'm gonna go ahead and reinvest it at the end. Or Adam Neumann saying, no, my behavior's justified because we need to keep this organization on edge and innovative in what we're doing. And so you need a dynamic CEO to do that, and that's why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. All of those were rationalizations and small compromises that led to ultimate failure. And then finally, and I really feel like the most challenging thing to come to grips with is every one of those 6 people had connected themselves to the identity as the leader and not necessarily connected to the mission and the values of the organization that they were trying to serve. And they would do anything to maintain that position. It had become more important than any other thing associated with their organization. And so after learning this, I sat back and said, okay, now it can't just be that you exist in a state of good, and then all of a sudden, through all those compromises and power bubbles, and I'm gonna own the identity, you immediately go to a place of bad, right? There have to be warning signs. We have to be able to do something about this and maybe recognize signs early on, those subtle ways that I mentioned in the title, so that we can maybe head some of this off as we go. And as I looked through the literature by some real smart people, you know, like at Harvard, or Brené Brown and the work that she does and some other folks, I started to see things that I now, this is me, group into these 3 categories. The first is you have to understand, identify, and name, the emotional red flags that you are feeling in spaces where you're about to make a really bad decision. Think back to the example I shared with you about how I went down my downward spiral. The first indication was that I was all up in my feels about that. And I had gone introspective, and I had really succumbed to the bitterness and the anger and the frustration I was feeling. I didn't do anything about it until I decided to take a really bad direction with it. But that was the first sign. Had I named it, had I dealt with it, had I walked through that with somebody that I trusted, it might have headed it off. And in fact, much of the research will tell you, and there's a wonderful Forbes article about the degradation of leadership, and this is one of the biggest things that they walk away with, is that if you deal with that early enough, you can head off some of the bad decisions long term. The second thing you have to look at is who is in the room with you. Remember earlier I talked about the power bubble, right? The power bubble is curated. It is something that over time, whether you realize it or not, by hiring people who are like-minded, sometimes we hear the word fit, you inevitably will end up surrounding yourself with folks who think like you, hold similar perspectives, make decisions like you do. And that is not what you want. You need to curate folks in the room who think differently than you. And as a leader, you have to create an environment where those people are comfortable speaking up. The downfall of Ellen DeGeneres is that the environment was not there where people could look at her and say, I don't think this is the right way to go. Or could come to her and say, we've got a problem at a level below, and that they felt they could be heard. So it's a both and. You bring people into the room, but you also have to create that space for them. And then finally, the tension of decision and control. If you are a leader, let's say positionally, and you find that you are making every single decision in the organization, from the strategic direction that you're going to head to the color of the pens that everybody gets to use, that is not leading, that is controlling. And what we never want to do as ethical leaders is to be in a space where all we are wanting to do is control. We make bad decisions, we don't listen to other people, and we end up in really bad spaces where, I can put those 6 people's faces back on the screen, we may see outcomes to that magnitude for whatever size organization that we are a part of. The other thing it does is it does not support trust. If you are making every decision as a leader, you have not developed your team and you do not trust them, which usually means they don't trust you. This is why I like Linda Fisher Thornton's 7 Lenses of Ethical Leadership. She and her team did a significant amount of research, and they found that these 7 things here need to exist in balance for leaders to remain and to really make those ethical long-term decisions and to avoid those subtle slips in power. So in this space, leaders know that profit, or in the case of nonprofit, maybe it's the resources that you bring in to serve the populations that you're charged to serve, it's just as important as the people that are part of your organization, including the stakeholders that you have. This is a space where compliance with law is held to a similar space or value as character and mission, so that your values and your compliance pieces are balanced with people and profit, with the support of community, with the continuation of your planet, with sustainability of the organization. All of these things have to be in balance for you to maintain that ethical leadership. And so I don't like to give folks a bunch of oh, these are horror stories, without talking about some folks that aren't in that space. These are people who are widely respected for being ethical leaders in their work. Now, some of them at the end didn't maybe have the results that they wanted to see, but the way they went about their work is something I think we need to talk about. And I actually did go and look up their stories and pulled some things out. But again, for folks playing along at home, let's name who these wonderful people are. In the upper left-hand corner, that is Yvon Chouinard. He is the founder and former CEO of Patagonia. And one of the things that he believed deeply in is that his organization was always going to serve the community and the environment. It's part of the mission of Patagonia. It has been from the beginning. And so when he retired, he set up a trust and basically gave the organization back to the employees, and the profit goes to support all of the things that are in alignment with the mission of that organization. Gentleman in the middle is Satya Nadella, excuse me. He is the current CEO of Microsoft. He is credited with taking that organization away from a competitive culture to one that promotes learning, development, growth, and true innovation in a spirit of collective impact. Gentleman up on the right is Craig Jelinek. He is the recent former CEO of Costco. And I think folks have seen in the news and in reports lately the difference in the way Costco makes decisions and how they center people and living wages and the folks that work with them differently than maybe some other organizations have. In the lower right is Anne Mulcahy. She's the former CEO of Xerox. She had to do a massive turnaround of that organization that resulted in significant reduction in force. But the way she did it centered humanity, and it really held that balance of longevity for the organization and people. And then finally, in the lower right is Indra Nooyi. She is the former CEO of PepsiCo. And her statement to her team is that we will always focus on performance as a purpose. Yes, we are going to look at the long-term health of the organization, but we will have a purpose behind it and a commitment to our people, our community, and the long-term sustainability of environment and organization. I think you can start to hear some common themes just in the high level of their story, but just in case, we'll help you along. Every one of these leaders, when you analyze their stories and their approaches, they lead with integrity. That seems like something that's basic and obvious, but what they do, whether they realize it or not, is they are balancing those 7 ethical lenses all the time. And when they come into tension with each other, they lean on their teams, they link together, they try and balance out the decision making so that at the end, they've made the best decision possible, even when it's hard. I say that Anne Mulcahy is a good example of that in the work that she did with her turnaround. They hold themselves accountable. So this is something that requires a level of really understanding your own value structure and how you connect that to the values of the organization, and then how you share that with all of those with whom you come in contact or that are connected to your organization as well, right? And so what happens then is people see you walk the talk. And that's an important component of ethical leadership. And it stops you from sliding backwards into power. And it also helps you recover from some of those moments when, not if, you slip up. Because every leader is human, at least until our robot overlords, I guess, decide that it's their turn. But in general, since every leader is human, we're going to make mistakes. But what matters when you hold yourself accountable is what you do. Example of that is the CEO of Microsoft. He famously sat at a Women in Computing conference in the mid-2010s and said, women shouldn't ask for promotions, they should trust the system. Now, anybody that is not necessarily aligned with the majority group in a particular organization understands trusting the system is a complicated statement and often not true. Okay? So he was confronted, as you can imagine, by that statement. People gave him some feedback. But what he didn't do is what we see many leaders do right now, which is to brush it off or try to PR it away, right? What he did was he apologized. He sent a message out on social media apologizing for his behavior and the statement, understanding it was wrong. And then he sent an email to every single employee of Microsoft and said, I was completely wrong. Here's why I know I was wrong. I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to educate myself. And here's how you know. And that's a powerful moment for a leader. Not just because they were holding themselves accountable, but think about the role modeling for their team and what that sends as an expectation. Radical self-awareness. This is cultivating a self-reflective mindset. They are constantly thinking about the decisions, not just that they make, but that they have made. They are evaluating that and looking at the impact of those decisions consistently. And they're creating a grounding framework for themselves on how they and the leaders that work with them are going to make these key decisions. This helps tremendously in long-term decision-making and consistency, and not just establishing, but maintaining trust. And this one I think is one of the most powerful, is they don't view themselves as somebody that owns the organization. They view themselves as stewards of the organization. They see this as a calling, as something they are entrusted with to focus on the people, on the outcomes, on the long-term sustainability of this organization or group that folks beyond them trusted them to lead in that moment. They also know deeply that power is a test, not a prize. The position of leader is not something you grab onto and say, I've won. It is something that every day you wake up and you face and you navigate along the way. Now, I am proud to say that the JPK Hot Mess Express that I explained at the beginning of this turned out much better than where we left it. I got some really great feedback from a trusted confidant outside of my organization who said, hey, you know what? You're acting like a child. You're jealous. You got to stop. And she and I co-created a plan that involved me sitting down with my supervisor and then my colleague and my team and really talking them through what I had done, why I did it, apologizing for it, and moving on. And that resulted in a reset of trust. And so what I will say to you all is that it took people to help me see that path. And what I would like to then reinforce is I believe that the common theme through all of this is that we lead better together. And so my challenge to you is, let's do that. Let's learn together, let's lead together, let's grow together so that as leaders, we do that not just with skill and ethics, but with a sense of soul. Thank you so much.